All right. Welcome to Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Genesis, Lesson 3. I'm Dr. Allen, and I'll be picking up where we left off in Lesson 2. Let's jump right into it. We were in Genesis 1. I'll start at the beginning and then pick up when we get to where we left off in Lesson 2. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now that's where we left off in our last lesson. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And one of the points I was making in our last lesson was that first and foremost, we have to understand that while in English the word is God, in Hebrew the word is Elohim. And this is a plural word ending in I-M, which typically indicates a plurality in Hebrew. So the Elohim is more literally the gods, a plurality of beings. So a plurality of beings are saying, "Let there be light." They're manifesting light. And with this is the beginning of creation. This is the beginning of space and time. Now, you'll note that there were things that the scriptures say were created prior to this, but these things aren't coming into existence by way of the Elohim through the Bereshit, which we learned in the last lesson, is the presence of Yahweh in space-time. They're coming to existence in a dimension that exists prior to and independent of space-time. So these particular heavens, these particular Shemayim, exist outside of space and time. How do we know this? Well, we know from science that light is the constant of the universe in a vacuum. The speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, is something that is constant. Under Newton, it was believed that the speed of light was relative, and I won't get into Newtonian physics and all of that, but Einstein cleared some of this up for us. Also, we know that when you split an atom, one of the first things that happens is there's a release of light. Splitting an atom is a fundamental quantum atomic means whereby you are bringing forth, you're manipulating space and time, and what happens is a tremendous amount of energy is released when you do that, and light is the primary manifestation of that. So in this passage, you have the Elohim, this plurality of conscious beings who exist independent of space-time, bringing space and time into existence by bringing in light. Light being something that exists in space-time that can operate as both a particle and a wave depending on its relationship to consciousness. If it's being observed, it's a particle. If it's not being observed, it's a wave. And I won't go into too much detail about that. I already did that in the previous lesson. But this is what you have happening right here in verse 3. In verse 4, the scriptures say, I'm reading from the King James, and God called the light, well, no, let's go back. In verse 4, and God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. So here, the Elohim are making a judgment about the light. And I talked about this a little bit in our first lesson. The purpose of creation, the purpose of space-time is to glorify the Elohim, to reveal the nature of the Elohim. So it has a function. So the Elohim are able to look at what they create and say it's good. In other words, it's useful for what it's designed for. So they look at the light and they say that it's good, it's useful. They understand how to use light in an effective way. And just as I've already said, if you can use light in an effective way, there must also be an ineffective way to use light. But the Elohim, because they are the creators, they understand the function and the purpose of what it is they're bringing into existence in this system, which is called by theologians creation. Let's keep reading. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. So the Elohim are creating, they're bringing forth space-time with word. So that lets you know that these are intelligent beings. These are beings of consciousness with intelligence, and they have the ability to express themselves through word. If this were the New Testament, we would use the word logos. They're able to express their intelligence. That's what logos means. Logos means intelligence. So when you go to the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. What's really being said there is in the beginning was logos. In the beginning was intelligence. The intelligence was with God, and the intelligence was God. So when we combine these two concepts, we get the firm understanding that Elohim beings are intelligent. They can express their intelligence. So, some people can say, well, were they really speaking? When you express intelligence, whether you're using a mouth or whether you're using thought, the expression of thought is the expression of intelligence, the expression of logos. So the point here is the Elohim create, they bring forth space-time by expressing logos, by expressing intelligence. And the Gospel of John agrees with this because the Gospel of John says nothing was made without the logos. That was made. So the only way to bring forth anything in space-time is through the expression of logos. You have to be able to express logos, express intelligence, in order to bring forth anything in space-time. The Elohim are beings that have the ability to express logos. Informally, you could say that's speaking. That doesn't necessarily mean that these beings had physical bodies and had physical mouths. They weren't physical because being physical is the receipt of the terrestrial realm. And the terrestrial realm doesn't exist yet. The terrestrial realm has to do with the earth. These beings are not of the earth. These beings come from beyond the earth, beyond the terrestrial realm. And when you say beyond the terrestrial realm, beyond the terrestrial, really what you're saying is extraterrestrial. So the Elohim are extraterrestrial beings. Yes, they're ETs, not like Steven Spielberg's 1982 film, because E.T. had a physical body. So even though he wasn't from Earth, he still had a physical body. The Elohim, they're not physical. They come from a realm beyond the physical world. Where do they reside? Well, we talked about that a little bit in our previous lesson. Gabriel says, I stand in the presence of the Lord. And as we talked about in the previous lesson, the presence of the Lord could also be understood as the Breshit, a point, an access point, an apex where beings outside of space and time can reside, an access point through which beings that exist outside of space and time can do things outside of space and time. It's the presence of the Lord. And who is the Lord? The Lord is Yahweh, El Elyon, God Most High. So the Elohim, by way of their logos, their intelligence, by way of the logos, the intelligence, are able to make judgment about light, that it's useful, and that they are going to be the ones who are the most effective at using it. And they divide it from the darkness, which is the absence of light. Darkness is a realm, any realm, where there is no light. So they call the darkness night, and they call the light day. And then the scriptures tell us, Moses tells us, this is the first day. So now we're not just talking about space-time. We're not just talking about light. We're not just talking about particles and waves. Now we're getting into numbers. So we're really going to get some insight into the intelligence of the Elohim in today's lesson. This idea of first, it's a number. Numbers are very important to the Elohim. The Elohim, as logos, intelligent beings, communicate through numbers. It's one of the means whereby they communicate and understand things. And as you'll find, a signature number of the Elohim is 7. 7 is a signature number of the Elohim. They tend to do things in sevens. So this is the first day. And as many of us already know, when we look at the days of creation for the Elohim, there's 7 days in all. And each day has a specific purpose and a specific function as the Elohim create, as the Elohim express their intelligence, as the Elohim, as conduits for the Logos, express themselves. So the first day, we have light and the separation of light from darkness, the separation of day from night. Now keep that in mind. Let's continue to read. No, you know what? I'm gonna do this differently. We're going to I'm going to give a general summary as opposed to reading this in totality. That way we can get into some more nooks and crannies of this particular lesson. We know that the Elohim create in 7 days. We know that 7 is a signature number of the Elohim. In fact, you see seven throughout nature, and it's a signature of the Elohim. When you take light and you refract it, you get seven colors. Perhaps as a child, you learned the abbreviation, the name Roy G. Biv. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Well, these are the seven colors that manifest when you refract white light. A human being, a normally proportioned human being, is 7 heads tall. If you take their head and you extend it by 7, you have their height. Music. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. And then when you get to do, you're dealing with a new octave. So you see 7 in music, you see 7 in light, you see 7 in the proportion of the Homo sapien body. It's a code. For whatever reason, the Elohim like to use 7 as their signature. Well, they don't disappoint when they create space-time, when they bring forth creation, because on the first day, the Elohim bring forth light. They separate light from the darkness. On the second day, they separate the waters from the waters by way of a vault. On the third day, they bring forth vegetation on the earth and waters to nourish the vegetation. On the fourth day, they bring forth the sun, the moon, and the stars. And it's often asked, well, how can you have light on the first day and the sun, the moon, and the stars on the fourth day? Why the discrepancy? Well, it'll be very clear as I continue, because the Elohim are doing more here than just creating space-time, just bringing forth the universe. They're also manifesting a code that goes even deeper than just what you observe in nature. On the fifth day, you're talking about fish and creatures of the sea. On the sixth day, you're talking about creatures of the land, including Homo sapien man. Not to be confused with Adam and woman. Notice I didn't say Adam and Eve. As I've indicated earlier, Adam and Eve were not in the garden. It was Adam and woman in the garden. Woman was the one who took the fruit from the serpent, the Nakash, the whisperer, not Eve. This idea that death entered the world with the taking of the fruit is interesting. It contradicts scripture, because Adam had the ability to understand the nature and the spirit of Akai Nefesh, because he had the spirit of Yahweh within him. Yahweh took dust of the ground and breathed into Adam, and Adam became a living soul, Akai Nefesh. So Adam had Yahweh's spirit inside of him. Because of that, by way of Yahweh's spirit, he was able to recognize and understand other spirits that were in other bodies. With that being said, he recognized that woman had come out of him, so he named her in English woman or womb man. But in Hebrew, Isha. He's Ish and she's Isha. Now, she takes the fruit, and we know that the Lord God, Yahweh Elohim, punishes Adam and Isha for doing so. The Lord God, Yahweh Elohim, also punishes the serpent. He's not a snake. You don't punish a snake by crawling on his belly. The snake is already crawling on his belly. That will be letting him off easy. The serpent was a son of the Elohim. He was a Nakash, a whisperer. Even today, when we say that someone is a whisperer, that means that they have great influence. A horse whisperer, a dog whisperer, a ghost whisperer. This was a being that could speak. This was a being that had great influence. This was a being that Adam called the Nakash, and it had great influence. It was a whisperer. Adam observed the sons of the Elohim and the daughters of the Elohim, and he named them the Nakash. He didn't name them the sons and the daughters of the Elohim. Remember, Adam didn't have knowledge of good and evil, so he didn't understand what the Elohim were. The only thing he understood was his fellowship with Yahweh Elohim. And why did he have fellowship with Yahweh Elohim? Because they shared the same spirit. So he named the sons and the daughters of the Elohim the Nakash. These were Homo sapien beings. The serpent was a fully upright Homo sapien being who could speak, who was an Elohim. That's why he was cursed to crawl on his belly and to be the lowest of creatures. Prior to that, he was the shrewdest. As a son of the Elohim, he was the shrewdest of all the Kai Nefesh. Yes, the sons and daughters of the Elohim were the shrewdest of all the Kai Nefesh, and they had the most influence. They were whisperers. They were Nakash because they had dominion over the birds. They were bird whisperers. They had dominion over the cattle. They were cattle whisperers. They had dominion over the fish. They were fish whisperers. So when Adam engaged them, he called them the Nakash, the whisperers. So anyway, woman, Isha, takes the fruit. She's not the author of death, as Christianity would have it. And we know this because Adam had the ability to recognize the nature of a spirit within a body. So when Adam and woman are expelled from the garden, the scriptures never say that they fell. Your notes, your editor's notes may say that, but the scriptures don't say that. They were expelled from the garden. They were not expelled from Yahweh's presence. Cain is having a conversation with Yahweh. He was never even in the garden. He has conversations with Yahweh. Even after he kills Abel, he's having a conversation with Yahweh. Cain had fellowship with Yahweh. Cain says, "Don't cast me from your presence." Now, how can you tell someone, don't cast me from your presence, if you're already not in their presence? Cain was offering sacrifices for himself. He didn't need a priest. Abel is offering sacrifices for himself, and he was accepted. He didn't need a priest. He didn't need a mediator. He didn't need mediation between him and Yahweh. Why? Because Abel was in Yahweh's presence. Cain was in Yahweh's presence. Adam and woman remained in Yahweh's presence when they were expelled from the garden. How do we know this? Well, the most powerful proof is this. Adam names woman Eve after they're expelled from the garden. And you know what Eve means? One who took the fruit and was deceived by serpent and brought death into the world? No, exactly the opposite. Eve means mother of all the living. Not someone who's dead. Not someone who has died. Eve takes the fruit, gets expelled from the garden, and Adam uses his ability in understanding and discerning spirits, names his wife mother of all the living. Now, the question becomes, well, hold on a second. The serpent said, you'll become like the Elohim if you take the fruit. You'll have the ka of the Elohim. That seems to have been true. Yes, that is true. When Adam and woman took the fruit, they became like the Elohim. They took on the ka of the Elohim. They became Elohim. And the serpent, the Nakash, the son of the Elohim, said, you won't die. Well, no, they did die. You have to understand what death is. Death is not loss of the Homo sapien body. That is a manifestation of a type of death. Death is a type of exile to another dimension, to a lower dimension. Prior to the resurrection of Jesus, when Homo sapiens died, their souls were exiled to Hades, a lower dimension. They continued to exist. They continued to be conscious. They even had bodies. Not terrestrial bodies, because terrestrial bodies are the receipt of being above the earth. No, they become what's called shades when you study Greek mythology. And their bodies reflect a shade nature. But yes, they're dead. The death had nothing to do with their relationship with their physical bodies. Their death had everything to do with their relationship to Eden. Their death had everything to do with their loss of access to the tree of life. Once they no longer had access to the tree of life, that was a type of death. They were now in a different dimension. But it did not mean that they had lost access to the presence of Yahweh. They still had access to the presence of Yahweh. Adam still had access to the presence of Yahweh. Adam, once he was expelled from the garden, he himself became a priest. He himself was now an Elohim because he had knowledge of good and evil. And as a priest with knowledge of good and evil, he had a ka, an image that could be extended. And the scriptures are clear on this. He extends his ka and his image to his son, Seth. Of course, Cain and Abel, Cain was exiled to the land of Nod, which was another type of death. And we know it was a type of death because Cain's relationship to his labor shifted. Adam's relationship to his labor shifted in the garden. He was in the garden and he had a symbiotic relationship with the garden. He was the supreme spirit of that realm. But once he left the garden, the earth would produce thorns and thistles, and he would have to work by the sweat of his brow. So that was indicative of the fact that he was in a lower dimension. But Cain got exiled to an even lower dimension, where he wasn't even able to work the ground. And the next thing you see Cain doing is building a city. And you know, his relationship with nature, he had lost his harmonious relationship with nature. And even for the modern man, this is a great commentary on one's relationship with death. You know, your relationship with your universe by way of your labor, is it satisfying? Or is it agonizing by the sweat of your brow? Does your labor produce thorns and thistles? Or is your labor harmonious? Is it complementary? When you find yourself in a realm where your labor is harmonious and complementary, you're in a higher dimension. When you're in a realm where your labor is agonizing and you're basically at odds with your universe, that's a lower dimension. We learn this in the scriptures. We learn this in Genesis. So Adam, being in the presence of Yahweh, having a Ka as an Elohim, extends his Ka to Seth. All Elohim have the ability to extend Ka. And Ka has the ability to produce ecclesia, community. In the New Testament, the word for ecclesia is church, but really ecclesia is any type of community that shares a Ka, and the evidence of that will be that Ka is the expression of an Elohim. A nation is an ecclesia. A nation has a Ka. A nation is the expression of an Elohim. So I'm going to finish on this point and then we'll continue. Remember, Adam is a priest. He's able to give a being an opportunity to be in the presence of Yahweh through his own being, because Adam is in the presence of Yahweh. Cain and Abel were in the presence of Yahweh. Seth is given that same Ka. And once Seth becomes a father, just so you know I'm not just talking, the scriptures are clear. When Seth becomes a father and Enosh is born, men begin to call on the name of the Lord. The name of the Lord is Yahweh. So once Seth becomes a father, there's a priesthood available for people that don't have that Ka. And you could say, well, if Adam has the Ka, why don't everybody have the Ka? No, the Ka was extended from Adam to Seth. And then when Seth becomes a father, because the father is the priest of his family, the father All families are ecclesias, and the father is the Homo sapien with the primary ka that governs and determines who is the Elohim of that family. Even the absence of father is a type of anti-ka, because in the absence of father, then other kas will come in and wreak havoc on the family. The father is the priest of his family. The father is the one who brings the ka to the family. The father is the one who determines who is the Elohim of the ecclesia, which is family. And Adam, make no mistake, even outside of the garden, was a priest who was in the presence of Yahweh and who could extend his ka. And he extended his ka to Seth, which means appointed. Seth becomes a father, and then there's a priesthood, a public priesthood available whereby man is able to call on the name of Yahweh. We'll pick it up and continue to go through the days of creation with lesson 4. But thank you for joining. This is Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Genesis. I'm Dr. Allen. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment as you wish.